Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Your organisation runs training courses for your staff and customers. Only problem is it's time-consuming, inconvenient and costly. Take a leaf out of our book. The School of Hard Knock Knocks uses the online training platform by YZ, and our team and customers love it. It's simple to use, supports every media format, audio, video, text, and looks great on desktops, tablets and mobiles. And for a limited time, quote SHKK when you arrange a demo and get 10% off your first year's plan. YZ helps us deliver comedy courses around the world. Imagine what it could do for your organisation. YZ, that's WYZED.com. YZ, online learning made simple.
You're listening to the School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast with me, Steve Davis.
Ladies and gentlemen, your next comedian.
Shouldn't drink on an empty head, you know that, don't you?
That is the shittiest heckle I have ever heard in my life.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
What's a bucket list?
You have dangerously underprepared yourself for the shit that is about to get real.
Marty Bright is an optimistic, childish sillybilly, which makes him a rarity in stand-up, often the domain of the cynic. In this School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast, host Steve Davis probes Marty about performing at the Comedy Store in LA, the comic strip in New York, and even at a room as part of an all-African-American comedian lineup. He might not be black, but he certainly has appeal. And if you're thinking of giving stand-up a crack in 2020, then you're in luck. Marty Bright is joined with Matt O'Kine as our comedy coaches for our January 19 to 23 stand-up comedy course in Sydney. To learn more, visit www.schoolofhardknockknocks.com. And now it's time for the delightful Marty Bright.
I got a shit phone. I don't like to use my phone more than I have to, right? Like I feel like the more I use my phone, the shitter my memory gets. Like my Google Maps, that teaches me how to get somewhere. My calendar goes off when important stuff's happening. I have to use the forgot your password button every day of my life. You guys know that little button on the bottom of every login reminding you that you've smoked too much weed? Just me? I use it I never needed that when the internet first came out. Remember when like in the 90s you could just use the same password for everything? Right? But you can't do that anymore because every website, they've all got their own like password constitution you have to obey. Right? It's got to have one symbol, 2 numbers, minimum 48 characters, a couple of Egyptian hieroglyphics in there. It's got to be a haiku. What the fuck? I'm not signing in. Not again. Pornhub. I did that already. Just let me in. Got a big show tonight. Let me in.
Marty Bright, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
In your own words, you are described as a silly Billy. So what are the characteristics of a silly Billy? What do you mean when you say that?
What do I mean when I say that? That's interesting because I did put that in my bio quite some time ago and I've never taken it out because I still think it's appropriate. What I would probably say is that I know that comedians can get quite complainy. I'm going to make up a word here. And can be quite whingy, and I don't consider myself someone who complains all that much, but if I do, it's kind of with a smile on my face. I don't really kind of put venom behind my words because I don't really feel a lot of venom towards the world. So I think that kind of sums it up when I perform. It's just more of like let's have a good time, as opposed to let me complain about everything that's been bothering me this week. So that's the best explanation I have right now.
Tell me if I'm wrong. It's like there's a blend of optimism and curiosity at the heart of your comedy. Is that fair, or have I glossed it over too much?
Yeah, I think so. Optimism is a good way to put it, and probably a bit of my inner child coming out. I was a bit of a performer. You know, whenever other adults would be over at our house, I'd always, run away for half an hour and enlist all the other children to create some type of very small theatre piece and be the director. And so I was always, being quite silly as a child. So I think the curiosity kind of is probably that inner child part of me.
It's actually interesting you mention that, because in other aspects of life, I lament the fact that we become disconnected from our childish selves, and it does inhibit creativity, and people take things too seriously. Not that there's anything wrong with being earnestly engaged in something, but in the world of comedy and stand-up, the child isn't often welcomed on stage. It is that really hardcore, cynical reflection on life. And maybe, there are pockets of childishness. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think there is a role to infuse some more childish views, in inverted commas, and childish spirit on the stage.
Yeah. I think it's all down to, what feels natural for people, and that feels natural for me. And I suppose a lot of, if the comedians that are being produced by the world, by produced by the world, I don't mean the comedians that are making it. I mean like the people that are doing comedy or starting comedy are only reflections of the people in the world. So if there's not a lot of silly Billy, childlike comedians, it's probably a pretty good sample size kind of market research for the fact that there's not many people who are feeling that way in the world right now, because there's a lot of hard things going on. So you're kind of going against the grain when you're being an optimistic silly Billy, and that's not always well received, because sometimes people want to relate, and they can't necessarily. Not everyone can relate with someone who's optimistic.
Well, there's something for anthropologists who are listening in. Forget canary in the coal mine. It's the comedian in the coal mine. That's the litmus test on where we are as a society.
Exactly. Well said.
Now, you've performed in the US, also in Canada. How were you received by those audiences? Because I imagine they're different audiences. Give us some of your memories and reflections on that experience.
I had a great time. I had been doing comedy for about 4 years, and I've been doing comedy for 8 years now. So in retrospect, if I had gone today, I'm sure I would have had even more of an amazing time. One thing I found was that I didn't really have to change my jokes that much, mainly because, or maybe even a few factors. I do, a lot of my favorite comedians are American, so my style, my cadence is pretty familiar. When you are not from America, there is a bit of a novelty, so people do kind of tend to listen to you when you walk on stage with a bit more of a kind of intrigue. And especially when you don't sound like Crocodile Dundee. I feel like a lot of Americans didn't even think I was American. They thought I was like South African or British, because they just have this like cliched idea of what we're going to sound like. But yeah, I did some really great gigs, some bucket list. I performed at the Comedy Store in LA, and in the small room, but still counts. And performed my first gig in LA. I went on before a comedian named Chris D'Elia, who is like one of the biggest comics in America right now, and that was really nice. A good friend of mine, Al Del Bene. I don't know if you know Al Del Bene. He's a American comedian from Boston who lives in Australia now. Him and I are quite good friends, and he was nice enough to connect me to some people that he has good relationships with in the States, and they, threw some stage time my way on his recommendation. Managed to do a gig at the Comedy Club, pretty much in New York. I performed at Broadway Comedy Club, Greenwich Village Comedy Club, Stand Up New York. There was a few of the like really top ones that obviously I wasn't in a position to kind of wiggle my way into, like the Comedy Cellar and a few of the others. But the comic strip I performed at, which was really nice for me because that was the club where Jerry Seinfeld kind of did a lot of his early work. So that was really nice. And I was the only non-African American comedian on an all African American comedian lineup at a show at a comedy club called Caroline's.
How did you pull that off?
I met one of the comedians who was organizing the gig at another gig, and he just asked me to do it. So I did, and it was just like any other gig. It wasn't really, it wasn't Def Comedy Jam or anything like that. It was just, I didn't have to tweak my set or anything like that. Not that I normally would, but just on a cultural level, I suppose there would be differences. And it seemed to be quite a clean show, I noticed. And a lot of comics were doing a lot of clean material, which I think if people have watched, if people put Def Comedy Jam on their list of examples of stand-up comedy like driven by the African American experience, the gig I did was really very different. It was very clean. It was really the only way I could, clean and wholesome.
Right.
So the Silly Billy was well received.
So you were mentioning names of lots of iconic comedy venues there, and sometimes a friend helped get you in. Is that what it comes down to at some level? It's getting known and networked behind the scenes to open some doors, or did you just walk up and ask and received?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think everyone's got a different. Every person is different, so every person has to navigate the industry differently because, you might be perceived in a different way based on the style of your comedy or, the way that you speak to people. Like I've always been pretty, I'm not going to even say confident, but I've always just been pretty content and I genuinely like meeting new people. Like for me to stay after a show and hang back at the comedy club for an hour and chat to some people, I probably wasn't going to do that anyway, even if it wasn't going to give me anything as like an industry kind of gain. But I remember when I was on the first time I did the Sydney Comedy Festival Roadshow, which is like a regional tour that they do as part of the Comedy Festival, Sydney Comedy Festival, after the festival's done. And I can't remember which comedian it was, but it was a more senior kind of comedian on the tour. He said, honestly, the number one thing is you just need to be easy to work with.
Right.
Like from a promoter's point of view, they don't want to, if you're causing hassle by going over time or getting overly, sloshed on booze or being a nuisance to the other comedians or, every promoter is different. So I think the best thing to do is just like, they say be yourself, but, be yourself, but also understand that, there are some realities of being in a room at the right time. Like I was at a club in New York when the headliner, a guy called Godfrey, who's like a really well-known comedian in the States right now, didn't turn up. And I was just there watching. I didn't think I was going to get on. And I'd been on the week prior. And the promoter just looked around and thought, do I know anyone in this room? We need one more act. So he threw me on. And even though the crowd didn't know me, he told the MC to really rev up, oh, this guy's all the way from Australia, because they were all expecting this other big name. So, but yeah, as far as my American trip, I did email ahead a lot, especially when you're coming from out of town and people don't know you. There is a danger to just fall into a sea of emails. So a really good a really good, well videoed and with really good audio clip at a professional looking club in Australia will actually always do wonders. And then, I had good recommendations from people, had some good credits on my list from the things I had done. So, yeah, it wasn't really I don't think it was any one thing that got me gigs. I think it was a combination of being personable, being funny. Ultimately, if you're not funny, no one's going to recommend you.
Sure. And
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Very shortly, I'm heading over to the States for a trip, and in the back of my mind is the thought of having a look around for any open mic nights that might be on. What's your advice? Is that something worth doing while you're in the building blocks of your career to take that up? And does that work overseas the way that it works here in Oz? Because Melbourne's got heaps of them.
I only did a handful of open mics while I was there. Some main differences between open mics in America and open mics in Australia. I would say one difference is that you generally have to pay to perform.
Right.
So you actually, some of them, there are free ones here and there, but they're essentially, it'll be like $5 and then you'll get on the open mic, because the open mics at clubs serve less of a purpose for the comics to it's more of a networking opportunity, because generally the MC of the open mic at a comedy club, let's say, for example, the Ha Ha Cafe, which was one I did in North Hollywood. So the MC of the open mic is one of the comedians who's trying to get in on the pro roster for the club. So he's doing his work experience by emceeing the open mic.
Yep.
Now, if he likes someone at the open mic who he thinks could progress to one of the new comics nights, he will give notes to the comedy club owner or whoever the director of booking is. And that's those $5 payments will go towards, paying the bar staff that's there or paying the MC who's doing the show. You'll very rarely get audience members. It's pretty much only comedians at these open mics.
Right.
And whereas in Australia, a lot of open mics actually get a bit of an underground following. I know in Sydney there's a few around Cactus Juice, which is in Newtown, and Tudor Comedy Night in Redfern. They have these little followings where people kind of like the rawness of it, whereas in America they have so much choice of the best comedians in the world trying new stuff on a nightly basis, like New York and LA, that it doesn't really seem very appealing to go to an open mic for a lot of people. But yeah, I would definitely do it without any expectation of what it's going to do, in terms of a career or anything. As in, you're not going to walk into an open mic and then the next gig you're going to be on the main stage. I think if anything, it's just a really great way to meet some new people, see how other people write jokes. Man, you never know if, some guy, some girl that you do an open mic with in LA might be the next big thing. And maybe one day they'll come to Australia and be like, hey, it's that person that I chatted with that one time. It's always, if you're not there, those things don't happen. So I would just always say, just say yes, just do the gig, just deal with if it's a bad gig, if it's a good gig, just do it.
Yeah. There is so much to do with just doing it, knocking on doors, asking, because you just never know what's going to come up. But if you don't do anything, nothing's going to come up. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of sage advice there. And just before we leave Northern America, differences between US audiences and Canadian audiences. I'd like to have a guess and say the Canadians might be a little more attuned to our English style of humour, but then they're right next door to the US of A. So I'm curious to hear what you thought.
Yeah, I would say that one thing about North America is just as much as the two countries are different, but every city is different. Like in the States, I would go from LA to San Francisco, and it's only, I can't remember how long the drive is, but it's in the same state, and you wouldn't think you are just based on people's sensibilities. I found my favorite. I did like Canadian audiences. I felt like they were. Yeah, I think you're right. They were up for a bit more kind of not absurd, but they were up for a little bit more alternative styles. I found a lot more alternative style comedians in Canada, and a bit more storytelling in nature as opposed to America. I think because everyone's trying to get on. Ultimately, everyone wants to get their 5 minutes on a talk show.
Sure.
So they're all trying to hone. They're trying to hone their best jokes, and you want to get the most jokes per minute. So I'm going to go quick, and I'm going to make sure that it's punchy because that's how I'll get my spot. Whereas I think in Canada, there's less. There's less kind of a cutthroat nature, so people kind of break out from the tight five a bit more and just get a bit looser. But I did gigs in Montreal and I did gigs in Toronto, and Montreal's obviously a French-speaking city, so there's more French-speaking comedy in Montreal than there is English. So that's another factor where you're in a city and the comedy night you're doing is the novelty night. Everyone's like, oh, it's English comedy. So there's some people in the crowd that are practicing their English. They're not even 100% sure what you're saying, but they're giving it a go. So that's, yeah.
Oh, wow. You run Doof Comedy Jam and Surrey Hills Comedy Club. Is that a way of guaranteeing you get gigs? I mean, and do you recommend this as a model to other comedians?
I think at some point in each comedian's journey, I think it is really important to gain some experience producing your own shows. It can be very beneficial getting stage time, might be a consistent $100 a week from a venue that's, giving you a space. You get to meet lots of people you get to book your favorite comedians and your friends potentially. But in saying that, it's not for everybody. There's a lot of people. I happen to be quite good at managing people, and I'm not great with social media, so that's been something I've had to learn is promotion and algorithms and how much effort you actually have to put in online to translate getting people to shows. But yeah, I think I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for someone who's just starting, just because I think you really want to just concentrate on yourself and finding your feet and finding your voice. And I think there is a bit of a backlash or a bit of a general feeling in the comedy industry when people who haven't been performing comedy for very long start running rooms or running comedy events. I've noticed a bit of a negative connotation towards that. Essentially the analogy I could say would be like someone who just started learning how to cook, opening a restaurant. You can do it and you can try your best, but there's just a certain amount of awareness of the things that go into making a good comedy night that can only come with time. So I've been doing it for 8 years, which is why I believe that whenever I run a gig, I run it really well, because I know that I've done really well-run gigs, and I've also done gigs that are really not well-run. So I kind of have a gauge of what my bar is quite high. And yeah, I think the Doof Comedy Jam that you mentioned is it's not a regular gig. I offer myself to apply to a lot of kind of alternative arts festivals that are like music festivals where people go and like camp away for the weekend. And yeah, I find that not too many comedians are really comfortable in that like party music festival vibe to do comedy. A lot of comedians that I've even booked for my gigs there get a bit kind of in their head that it's going to be too rowdy. But I started doing them and just realized that I actually, in my experience, for me, they're my favorite gigs to do because there's such a celebratory nature in the air. And so my silly Billy optimism is often matched by the audience. And I don't have to, I don't feel like I'm being, the happy hippie love guru in a pub. I'm actually just in a field on a stage.
Yeah.
People are outdoors. Some of them are, got their shirts off. Some of them are sitting in beanbags, and they're all on different concoctions of chemicals, most likely. But it's just an interesting. I'm actually doing one in New Zealand at the beginning of next year called Earth Beat. So that should be interesting to do. That'll be my first international of those festivals. So
Wow.
that'll be interesting.
Poetry's in your life as well. Is there much crossover between poetry and comedy for you?
Spoken. I refer to it as spoken word. Just
Okay.
a bit of an industry hot tip. That it's kind of moved away from the word poetry a little bit and more to the word spoken word to allow for people who kind of have a bit more of a broad style. Spoken word is a new avenue of expression for me. I started doing it about 3 years ago. It's actually really allowed me to keep my comedy silly and keep it light because I kind of let a lot more of my sincere, deep, emotional thoughts out through my poetry. So it's almost like I've been able to separate the water from the oil and it's interesting. I feel like in spoken word, I'm very honest and sincere. And I feel like now when I do comedy, I am now more honest and sincere when I do comedy because I have felt what it's like to be received and appreciated in my truth through spoken word. And now I've gone back to comedy and I've thought, I don't want anything but that. So I want laughs, but I only want laughs if they're coming, they're coming as a result of sincere and genuine. Not that I was ever a hack or someone that was, putting anything on, but I think we all do. We all put on masks and we all put on some type of facade when we do comedy. And I think for me, a lot of people subconsciously imitate their favorite comedians, which I think is completely natural. And I don't think it's actually anything wrong with it because it's kind of like a bit of it's like training wheels for comedy. It's like you wear these training wheels because you're familiar with the cadence of Chris Rock or, you're familiar with the way that, Norm Macdonald phrases things. And so you use that for a bit, but then you find your own voice and then you kind of shed that layer of your skin. And I feel like poetry has helped me shed the layer of the things that I was holding on to, those subtle influences of other people, because now I'm kind of, more comfortable being closer to 100% my real self on stage.
When we tried to do this the first time, I was running late, having phone troubles, and you were off to a meditation class. And as I've been thinking about that, I often get ideas for comedy while I'm in the small hours of the morning and I've got a pad by my bed and I reach over. In meditation, do you have ideas bubble up through your subconscious and you have to break meditation to write them down? Or do you follow the mindfulness code and say, well, thank you for that. Please move on. We'll come back to you later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't know how much you knew about the different strands of, it's funny. Sorry, I just looked at the time, and it's 11:11, and 11:11 is in the spiritual world, is a very significant number,
Wow.
and we're speaking about that right now, which is interesting. So I actually yesterday I went to what's called a sound healing. I don't know if have you heard of that term?
No.
So it was there's a Nepalese man who lives in Newtown in Sydney, and he has a studio where he facilitates sound healing sessions. So essentially you just lie down in the dark and he will play a variety of quite kind of Zen and relaxing instruments around you. Just like, if you got some CD that was like relaxation music for the bath. But he's just doing it right near you, and you can actually feel the vibrations of the chimes or he has these Nepalese singing bowls, which are these like big kind of bronze bowls that are different frequencies, and he'll do them really close to you. So that's where I was going yesterday.
Wow.
And yeah, I don't generally have ideas for comedy. I've definitely come up with some spoken word concepts through meditation. I think if anything, the meditation and things like the sound healing help almost like clear my passages so that then ideas can come through afterwards. It's more like a cleanse. And then I'm more in like a open space to, I think I get most of my comedy ideas when I'm doing things. It's actually the opposite. When I'm actually out doing things, having conversations, I'll, be talking to someone or on the bus, and I'll be like, oh, that's a joke. And I'll write it down in a short sentence and maybe elaborate it on a little bit. And then I'll just let that idea ruminate in my head. I often don't write down a joke I often don't write down the full version of a joke until I already have it memorized in my head. So that's like a little way that I actually memorize is I memorize first by memorizing while I'm writing, because I only write it in my head, because then I feel like a fight or flight instinct kicks in. It's like, you better remember it. What is it again? Okay, so you're going to say this, you're going to say that. And then you pause, and then you're going to maybe, make this noise, da-da-da. If I was writing that down, I could, for myself, feel a bit of complacency. Okay, right. I could be writing it on the paper. Oh, cool, the joke's written. Close the book. As opposed to keep it in my mind, and it's kind of, and then if I say it on stage for the first time, it has more... I feel like I'm more excited about it because I haven't written it down and seen it tangible. It's still just a concept, and it's kind of thrilling. You know what I mean?
Wow. Look, I actually think it would be thrilling to be doing the course that you're about to run. So I'm curious to see what the students' experience is like, because there are many roads that all lead to comedy, and you're going to take people, guide them along the way with your insights from your knowledge, which is January 19 to 23. Matt Okine is also on board. And as you're getting ready to be our resident comedy coach for the School of Hard Knock Knocks, tell me, what advice to any newbies, just a little bit of light advice as anyone's preparing, building up the confidence to step out and perhaps do a course or start on this journey?
I understand not everyone's going to do the course. So I suppose a bit of, I don't know, maybe it's the hippie in me. I don't really like the word advice. I like the word guidance.
Okay.
Because it implies that you don't have to take it, or, anyway. But I would say, it sounds almost overly simple, but I would say have fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think because we have access to watch the most established, experienced, hilarious comedians in the world at our fingertips now more than we've ever had. I think people often make giant leaps with where their comedy career is going to go. And I think that can often add stress when people are actually at the beginning part of it, which is actually the most enjoyable part of it, because no one's expecting anything of you. It's kind of like what people say about being a child. It's like no one's expecting any of you. You don't have any responsibilities. You can actually say whatever you want. You know, you're not like having to submit scripts for a TV show where they edit away some of your jokes because they're not, you know, appropriate for TV. So it's actually, you know, you're in the child equivalent of your comedy career. So it's not about thinking about too far ahead of, when am I going to start making some money? It's like, well, you haven't held a microphone yet. Yeah. So I think as long as you can have the most fun that you can have, writing, meeting other people, performing, then even if you never progress past doing open mics, at least you'll still be having fun. Yeah. You know? And if you end up on stage at Madison Square Garden, then you started out having fun, so you'll probably, you know, have that fun, loving nature in you because that's how you've started. So you'll kind of hopefully take that momentum further forward.
And with that beautiful reference to remembering that inner childlike spirit, we've come full circle. And we couldn't have planned that any better. It's almost poetic, or spoken word, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. It's been such a joy, and a lot of what you just said then resonated deeply with me, and I'm sure for people listening in as well. How do we find gigs that you're involved in?
Yeah, I'm across all the not all. I'm across the basic social media platforms. As I said before, I'm not hugely tech savvy, but Instagram and Facebook, I'll post most of the gigs that I have. So Marty Bright is me on Facebook, and Marty is Bright. So Marty is Bright is my Instagram, but I think if you type Marty Bright into that as well, it comes up.
I saw what you did there.
Yeah, exactly right.
And if we wanted to book you, same deal, just connect with you through those means?
Yeah. I think it's pretty simple these days to find people. There's lots of messenger, email, contacts on Facebook pages and things like that. So, yeah, if you just type my name into Instagram or Facebook, there's not too many Marty Brights doing comedy.
Marty Bright, thanks for being on the School of Hard Knock Knock podcast.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.